Welcome to CIMM Sessions, small servings of theology, culture, and community of Christ identity, mission, message, beliefs, and practices. I'm David Lloyd, the director for the Center for Innovation in Ministry and Mission through Graceland University and the Community of Christ Seminary. Tonight, we're starting a series that I'm really excited about. Here in the U.S., we're 1 month away from a general election, and so the rhetoric is high, and the division is stronger than ever before. And we in a peace church are trying to figure our way. How do we become a people of peace in the midst of so much conflict? So tonight, our topic for this series is people, politics, and discipleship. It'll be a 3-part series for the next 3 weeks. And tonight our topic is seeing conflict as an opportunity. And we are blessed to have with us Debbie Bayless from the Center for Conflict Resolution here in the Kansas City area. Debbie is a community cohort manager and has been a mediator with CCR since 2004. She currently works with neighborhoods and several restorative justice court division programs. She completed her master's degree in restorative justice at Eastern Mennonite University. But again, welcome, Debbie, and thanks so much for joining us on on such a big day here in Kansas City. And I do see that you do have Royals blue on, so apologies to any New York fans who might be watching. And tell us a little bit about the Center for Conflict Resolution and your part in that to start us off.
Sure. So the Center for Conflict Resolution was started by Sandy Gamay and Diane Kaiser around 1999-2000. It was the Community Mediation Center at the time, serving Eastern Jackson County and the Kansas City area, just to do mediations in communities with neighbors, families, and whatever the opportunity was for helping people resolve their conflicts. And it's expanded over the years. I started working there about 4 years after it started, and started part-time doing juvenile victim offender dialogues with kids that had some court issues, and being able to help them address the harm that had been caused, and connect them to the person that they harmed, and find a way to have them make it right and find ways to prevent it. So that was my beginnings. And then starting 2009, I've been working full time. And about 10 years ago, they changed the name to Center for Conflict Resolution. Also at that time, we moved to the Kansas City proper area and have been there, moved we're in our 3rd location in Kansas City now, in the old Westport Junior High building, if you're familiar with Kansas City. So, and we do all kinds of things. And would it be okay if I start my PowerPoint presentation now, David?
Absolutely, go right ahead.
Okay, because I've got a little slide that gives you an idea of what some of the pieces are that we do. All right, can everybody see my slide? All right. So in Kansas City, we serve 3 different areas. We serve community, which is the one that I'm primarily involved in, where we do a lot of landlord-tenant cases, along with neighbor, family, church, organizations work, anywhere where there's conflict, people aren't getting along, and they're needing another party to help them resolve things. That's what we do, whether it's court connected or self-referred. It doesn't have to be connected to a court case. We also work in schools, and we bring a lot of restorative justice concepts, restorative practices to schools, where it's treating the everybody, including staff, teachers, the students and their parents, in ways where their voices are heard, addressing issues, but also creating safe learning environments. And so we do conflict resolution trainings, as well as just being there for if somebody's in some kind of a disagreement or needs mediation. We're also working in a transition center. It switches back and forth from a minimum security prison to a transition center. And Missouri Department of Corrections has actually let us turn it into a restorative reentry community. And that is huge, where those that are in the facility are called residents, not offenders. They get to wear their regular clothes. They have opportunities to continue or connect with family members, because we believe that 97% of those that are incarcerated are going to come back into our communities. And so what can we do to have them have the skills and have their needs met, so that they can be productive and safe neighbors to be in our community. So those are the three areas that the Center for Conflict Resolution works in. And I continue to be part of this group, or this organization, because for me, it matches with the enduring principles of Community of Christ. It's worth of all persons, and pursuing peace and such. So this for me is living how I see, as a Community of Christ member, I want my community to look. So the first piece that I would like to talk to you all about is the idea of dignity. And for dignity, it's different than respect. And the way that I'm going to help define this is respect is something that you can earn or you can lose, depending on how somebody acts or how you act. With dignity, it comes from Dr. Donna Hicks, who was a conflict resolution specialist for international conflict. She was in South Africa. She was in Ireland, working with major leaders and trying to help them resolve conflicts. She started identifying the types of conflicts that people were involved in, and saw that there was some similarities to what was at the core of the conflicts. And so I'm going to go through the 10 essential elements of dignity, and I'd like you to think about, how do they impact you when you have had one of these, maybe not, somebody hasn't treated you with this element of dignity, and or how has that been the source of some of the conflicts that you've been involved in? So as we go through this, think about connecting to some of these concepts. The other piece about dignity is that this is for everyone, whether they're the person that caused harm or whether they're the person that was harmed. And so everybody deserves dignity. You are born with it. And so how can you, even if you are talking to somebody that has taken somebody's life or harmed somebody, how can they still have dignity? And so hopefully, as you look at these concepts, you can see how just because somebody has caused harm, they can still have elements of dignity. So the first one is acceptance of identity. So you think about all the different types of identities that people have, and I'm not going to read all of the definitions at this time, because I have a limited amount of time to talk to you all. But acceptance of identity connects to race, religion, gender, class, sexual orientation, age, disability, all kinds of things that are who you are. And if somebody doesn't accept you for those pieces of you, there's going to be some kind of a conflict. And so I know that there's several Community of Christ congregations that are welcoming congregations. And it's not just that you have a sign that says welcome. You've intentionally created and understood what it looks like to be a welcoming congregation. And so actually taking those, the ability or the knowledge and listening to those who might feel like they're on the outskirts of the society, giving them the opportunity to be included. Recognition is another concept. If you are somebody who has completed some kind of a project and somebody else gets the credit for it, that can cause a conflict. So recognizing people for their hard work. Acknowledgement is another one. So in the time of cell phones and lots of social media and distractions, it's important to realize that when you are in some kind of an interaction with somebody, giving them that your attention, listening, validating, and responding is really important. Inclusion, mentioned that earlier, but for me, the key piece here is inclusion is family, community, organization, and nation. So are the people that you're interacting with feeling included? I can give you an example. In Kansas City, in the Northeast area, there's a lot of immigrant families and communities. And one of the issues that we came across when I was working with housing code issues is that they weren't aware of some of the regulations and ordinances in the city and started getting some like notices and needed to mow their lawn, or they needed to, paint their house or that kind of thing. Guess what? They couldn't read the information. And so they weren't included in the community in a way for them to actually understand how to actually be a good neighbor. And so being able to have things translated, to be able to see what does it take to have people be included, and listening to those that feel excluded as to what they need, whether it's language, whether it's the type of relationships they're in, those kind of thing. The next one is safety. That's a really big one. And the key piece for me in this one is, besides the physical, which is the obvious one, you don't want to be hurt. So what can you do in the relationship to feel safe? The other piece of this is psychologically safe. So do you actually feel like the things that you say will be received without you feeling like you might have some kind of fear of retribution or such? So being able to create that a safe place for people to talk and be in the actual space. The next piece is fairness, treating people justly. The key for me on this one is with agreed upon laws and rules. Are all the laws and rules divvied out fairly in our community? And have the people that are receiving the consequences of the laws and rules, are their voices being considered in those, in that fairness? Independence. I'm working on this with my parents currently. They're at various different levels of independence. And you can think of teenagers as they're maturing and becoming less and less dependent on their parents, but also in times when you need to have others help you out. Are we empowering people with as much possibility of hearing their voice? I think of people that are incarcerated. There's a feeling of independence, and so that can cause conflict. So how can you incorporate as much independence and hear people's voice? Creating understanding is another concept. Being able to listen to people and truly understand. And as David was mentioning earlier with the political climate in the US, are you listening to what's going on those that you don't understand? It doesn't mean that you need to agree with others. It just means maybe being curious and asking deeper questions. Could you help me understand what's going on for you? Or how do you come to this conclusion? I'd like to hear more about this from you. So that's the idea of understanding and having the opportunity to explain. Benefit of the doubt. Treat people as trustworthy. This doesn't mean you continue to be a doormat for people where they continue to walk all over you. But when you first interact with somebody, don't judge them by maybe a previous experience with somebody that looks or acts similar. Give them the benefit of the doubt. And then if you do need to create boundaries, that's something that you can do without having to violate their dignity, but giving people that they have good motives and are acting with integrity at the first chance. And then the last piece is accountability. Take responsibility for your actions. I would suggest that, and this is maybe going on a whole nother tangent, but the criminal justice system actually stops short of actual accountability, because a lot of times the person doesn't make it right to the person that they harmed. Through the criminal justice system, there's punishment, but the actual accountability of facing and making it right to the person that was harmed is what I believe a dignity, an element of dignity that everybody should have the chance to do. So those are concepts that are at the foundation of all of our processes that we do. So we do mediations, we do victim offender dialogues, we facilitate larger group conversations, we do circle processes, whether it's a community building circle, conflict circle, celebration circle, healing circle. We try to figure out how we can have people feel included, their dignity accepted, or their identity accepted, have as much voice, where it feels fair. All of these things are important. So thinking about in your congregations, in your neighborhoods, what pieces might be missing? What could you implement? And I think these, the 10 essential elements of dignity, make for great discussion topics. Having classes or having a dialogue about this. How does this concept affect all the people that you're interacting with? So these are ideas that I think just have lots of potential for good conversations. And so on the flip side of the 10 elements of dignity are the temptations to violate dignity. And I'm not going to go over these as thoroughly, but just reading them. And when our dignity is violated, we have the tendency as human beings to respond in ways that might violate somebody else's dignity. And if somebody hurts you and you in response hurt them, guess what? You have the obligation then to be accountable for the harm that you caused. So just keeping that in mind. The first one is taking the bait. Somebody does something, we respond with a quick reaction. Saving face. We don't want to be caught doing something wrong, and so sometimes we'll cover things up. Shirking responsibility, making somebody else be responsible for it. Looking for dignity, where we try to minimize others to uphold our own dignity. False security. We see that with in relationships, where you stay with somebody because you're worried that you're safe, you're not going to be able to make it without somebody, and you stay in an abusive relationship, for example. Avoiding conflict. That's what hopefully today will give you some courage to face conflict in a way where it can be productive, give you tools and ideas. Being the victim. Now, making sure that this isn't saying that there aren't people that are survivors and victims of harm. This is saying sometimes in a relationship, you might have something that you could contribute to making things right about. So it's not just the other person doing all the things, if you're in a balanced relationship. Resisting feedback. Sometimes it's hard to hear some constructive criticism, but if you don't resist that feedback, the relationship and the interaction can be improved. And then blaming and shaming others to deflect your own guilt. And I'll go ahead and bring up the last one too, engaging in false intimacy and demeaning gossip. Both of those are ways that we triangulate. We bring people into the mess that we're in the middle of. And the last sentence here, if you want to create intimacy with another, speak the truth about yourself, about what is happening in your inner world, and invite the other person to do the same. So it's okay to vent and get some of the frustrations you have with somebody off your chest. But if it gets to the point where all you're doing is bad-mouthing somebody, that's not going to be productive. After you vent, or if somebody vents to you, you ask them what they're going to do. How are you going to approach that person? How are you going to address the conflict? And so having it be a productive thing instead of just going down a rabbit hole of negativity. And so that's the idea of dignity. There's a book where each of these has its own chapter if you're interested. It's called The 10 Essential Elements of Dignity that I recommend. So on to the next concept. So one of the other books that we use is The Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. And the idea is being able to unpack the things that you think and say to people as whether they're observation or judgment. Another way to look at judgment is evaluation. So am I just talking about what I'm observing, or am I actually putting a little bit of an opinion onto the concept? So we look at this picture here. It's a beautiful day. That is a judgment. A judgment is me deciding that that looks like a beautiful day. It's not saying that I'm wrong. It's just saying that I have evaluated that picture to have it be a beautiful day. The observation of this is sunny day in the mountains. So you have the sun, the mountains, and that would be something that would be observable. And so the ideas here are, if you can unpack the words that you say to where they're not putting a spin on it, then when you approach somebody that you're in conflict with, they're going to be able to understand it a little bit easier. Let me show you another picture. Best painting of all time. That might become a controversy if you have a different opinion or you don't like Impressionists. Starry Night by Van Gogh would be an observation. The reason that observation judgment is important to unpack is if I were to approach you and say, you stole my job, you're probably going to close up and not talk to me any further. If I approach you and say, Sam told me that I was going to get this job, and today Sally told me that you have the job. Would you be willing to talk to me about that? That would be easier to receive than you stole my job, which might be what I'm thinking. And so the idea with observation judgment is that you want to open up the conversation where that person's willing to dialogue with you, instead of closing it down and just being right or accusing somebody of something. If you break it down into observable pieces, it's easier to receive and that dialogue stays open. The other idea that we can look at is the conflict choices. If you look at this grid, you see that you have goals going up and down and relationship at the bottom from left to right. And so we will look at these different concepts in connection to whether they're focused on goals or whether they're focused on relationships. So in the first quadrant up in the top left, which is where the goals are the most important and highest, you see that it's a forced or direct choice, where I win or lose, or where I win and you lose. And when we do this with kids, we have a shark. as the representative of the forced choice. And it can be treated as my way. An appropriate way to use choice is when your life is in danger. You want that firefighter to get you out of that burning house. But if the firefighter decided he wanted to be collaborative and sit down and chat with you, you might both burn. But the idea is life-threatening things are okay for the forced choice. The next choice is the avoid. The turtle is the animal that we use for that, and it's I lose and you lose. So neither one of our voices are heard. And again, with the forced choice, if you are in a relationship and only one of you gets to make choices and says what needs to happen, that's very imbalanced. In the avoid choice, if you can always, if neither one of you ever addresses any of the conflicts, then a lot of times those are when people will let things go for a while and then explode later. Appropriate time to avoid is if you're going to the 7-Eleven and somebody bumps into you and spills your drink, and you're headed to your kid's birthday party. You're not going to engage with that person because you don't have a relationship with them and your goal does not include them. And so avoiding at that time, because you're not continuing on in that connection, is okay. But if you're in an ongoing relationship with that person, you want to make sure to not avoid all of your conflicts. The next concept is accommodate or harmonize. We use the teddy bear, not the grizzly bear, for this picture or this conflict choice. It's the I lose, you win. So I won't speak my voice. I'll make sure that you're okay. In this picture, in the graph, you see that the relationship is the primary and the goal isn't very high. So it's all about making sure the other person is okay and you lose your voice. In this, if this goes on for too long, the person who continuously accommodates forgets who they are, forgets what they like. If all they do is take care of their kids, I was that mom who went to McDonald's way too many times with my kids and didn't even know what I actually liked once they were out of the house. So I had to relearn what my choices and what I liked. And always making sure the other person's okay. Then you have in the middle where the goal and the relationship is halfway. It's an I win, lose, you win, lose, where you're going to get half of what you want. A good example of this is settlement negotiations, a union negotiation where you get a higher pay and better vacation, but you don't get better equipment to work with. So if you would get some of what you want, but not all of what you want. And there's always something left on the table. And so in this compromise choice, it keeps people happy for a little while, but it doesn't stay. There's always going to be more that needs to be worked through. And so then you have the collaborate choice at the top, where it's I win, you win, and it's our way. This is where you listen to both parties, both people that are involved, and want to make sure that both of you have that chance to share in the issues. The only drawback with collaborate is it does take time. And so if you're in a life-threatening situation or need a real quick answer, collaborate is probably not the best choice, but all other times, collaborating is the way to go. If you want a healthy, balanced relationship where all voices and everyone's interaction is valued, and it reduces conflict. If you're able to do the collaborate choice as soon as possible, then you're going to be able to have a longer longer outcome, or an outcome that lasts a lot longer. Let me give you an example. Imagine I have an orange and just one orange. In the forced choice, I would take the orange. In the avoid choice, neither one of us would get the orange. In the accommodate choice, I would give the orange to you. In the compromise choice, I'd cut the orange in half. In the collaborate choice, we'd actually figure out what it is that we want about the orange. Maybe I'm making a orange cake that needs a little bit of orange zest, and you are thirsty, and so you want the juice out of the orange. We might, if we sit down and talk to each other, both be able to get what we need. And that's the value in taking that time to actually figure out what's going on and not forcing and including those that are involved in the conflict. And that allows for the goals as well as the relationships to be upheld. And that's the focus and understanding of this. So thinking about how you approach conflict, and are you allowing for other people's voices? Are you contributing? Are you finding ways for you to share your voice, your piece of the puzzle? I believe that the pieces that we're missing in our communities, we need to uphold and find them so that we can have those missing pieces. So we need everyone to participate if at all possible. Give you a tip on a way to approach people when you are in conflict with them. We have the talk process, which is you take a breath, kind of calm down, make sure you're not approaching somebody when you're in the midst of your conflict, and you then think about how you're going to approach them. And you're going to want to approach them with an observation and maybe an I statement. I feel frustrated when you interrupt me during our meetings. Would you have time to talk to me today? So you then ask them for their perspective first. Could you tell me what's happening from your view? And then ask if you can share your perspective. Then you list options as far as how to solve it. After you've heard each other's perspective, then you think about how are we going to do this differently so that we don't have this issue come up again. We've been in schools and done mediations where they've said, oh, we've already done mediations. The versions of their mediations is putting kids in the room and making them apologize, but not actually working through what it looks like to coexist together in the future. So the L in talk is where you actually start listing ideas on how you're going to get along. And so if the person continues to interrupt, for example, you would say, it sounds like you need time to share your perspective. So what does that look like? How would they be able to share their perspective so that they don't feel like they need to interrupt the person? And then how will you share your perspective or let them know that you have something to say? So you would list those ideas. Then you would look at those ideas. At first, you don't evaluate whether the ideas are good or not. Then you go through them and making sure that each of you have had a chance to share. Then you talk about what's going to be the reality. Is this one going to work? So if I say that I'm just going to mute you every time on Zoom when I don't want you to interrupt, that might not be the nicest way to do something. So what would be a realistic way to move forward? So then you keep it real and you create that plan that you both agree to. And so approaching somebody so that it doesn't fester, it doesn't blow up, giving somebody the chance to speak, but also making sure your voice is part of the outcome is really important. And then you co-create that agreement on how to move forward so that harm doesn't continue to happen. So that's the talk process. And for those of you that are in the area, I just wanted to give a little bit of a shout out to what some of the trainings that we have coming up. We have interpersonal conflict resolution, October 21st and 22nd, where it's a 2-day class where you learn your own conflict style and how to resolve conflict in your own life. And then the second half of the week is mediation training, where you learn how to take care of other people's conflicts or help them work through their conflict with a transformative mediation style. And then the Neighborhood Accountability Board is a restorative justice process that we do to address the court processes or the court referrals that we have. And that's a free training on November 13th. And there's my information. And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Debbie. This is kind of the preliminary that we wanted to do at the beginning of this series, to talk about ways of talking to each other in this politically charged and divisive time that we live in. And I think, no matter where you come from, you can feel that. And in some places, our congregations are hurting because of that conflict. We have, and we'll talk about this a little bit more next week in regard to our theology and how it affects or should affect our politics rather than the other way around. But what you've presented here is a lot of strategies that I see would also especially help us around the Thanksgiving table, which is coming up both in Canada and the United States soon. We have not just opposing opinions in the congregation, we have opposing opinions in our families. And these are important points to be able to try and wrestle with as we're coming around that table. So I guess my first question would be those 10 essential elements of dignity. How do you even approach someone? Let me back up. We would feel that our political values are connected to our theological values at times. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But I think especially in a more socially liberal church, we tend to think that the two run together. And yet those 10 essential elements of dignity give us a chance to stop for a minute and talk to the person rather than talking to the political party. So help us churchify that a little bit in those 10 elements. How do you think that works within a congregation? How could we make it work in a congregation?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we see these as ways to understand maybe why we're upset with that person. What is it about that their view versus our view that we can maybe understand why we're reacting the way we are ourselves? Excuse me. But also then being able to listen. I think it's so important to be able to give people the opportunity to share what's going on from their perspective, and then see if they're open to hear from you about what's going on for you, and not just staying at the surface. That's another concept that I didn't put in today, but being able to go underneath the surface. What really is at the core of this? Did they have a life experience that might have had them really value a certain viewpoint, or do they feel threatened? Do they feel like their safety or their livelihood is threatened? So that's usually behind a lot of that. And if you aren't defensive about it, but just more curious and willing to listen, I think that's really important.
Yeah, because a lot of times we want to take our stand, and we hear someone say something that we're diametrically opposed to, as far as a political view in church, no less, where we're supposed to be good peacemakers and loving each other regardless, and we start to feel that hair bristle up on the back of our neck and want to dig in deeper to our point of view. And I think that part of that isn't being seen in in politics so much is the stopping to listen to each other long enough to understand where a person's coming from.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point is that we don't have those role models right now. No
Yeah.
matter pretty much any political party that's going on, they're not listening and being willing to acknowledge the worth of the other person. And so
And
as
that's
Community of Christ members,
yes.
I think we need to model that in our community, being willing to listen, being willing to share and share our perspective.
And being able to hold on to our personal political opinions
Hmm.
and yet listen to somebody else.
Yeah.
That is a model that I think the church really could lift up to our communities in showing that there is space to hear each other in. So you talked about talking about issues without putting a spin on it. So what are some good strategies for not putting a spin on it when we're talking to somebody?
Well, I think just being able to see, am I putting my opinion into this statement, or can I give it to them in a way where they just see their behavior? So it's the action and behavior that you can look at versus that they're mad. Like
Yeah.
there's people that react differently. You might just have a really enthusiastic way of interacting and raise your voice because you're excited. Somebody might take that as being mad. And so
Right.
if you can say, wow, the other day when we were talking, I was confused. Can you help me understand what was going on for you? And then they might say, "Oh, I just really liked the potluck dinner," or something like.
Yeah.
And you thought that they were mad at the green beans or something. I don't know. So, but if you can take it back into and catching yourself, I think that's one of the biggest lessons I learned is I am evaluating so many things because of my past experience, my history of how I,
Right.
interpreted the situation in the past. But if I can take a step back and actually say, all right, I just saw this person do this, and it's not that they were bad or good. It was that they did this that is observable. And if you can, that's how you approach them, then that's going to be easier for them to know what's happening for you. And your feeling frightened doesn't isn't negated. It just means that um, if they hear that you were that this action caused you to be afraid versus they're scary or they're awful, or they're bad people or something. So
Yes. Yes. Well, I see Karen has raised a question. Does the church or CIMM have this kind of training for those not in the Kansas City area? I would say that this CIMM session is one little bite-sized nugget of that conflict and mediation technique, but we hope to have some others further in the future where we can talk about this subject some more. Are there any other national or international organizations that do the same kind of thing that your group does here in Kansas City?
So there's a lot of mediation centers. I know there's some states that actually have it incorporated in their government. Like Nebraska has mediation centers in every county. I think New York does too. There's mediation centers all over. They're not all. Some are more legal connected. Most of our mediators are not attorneys, and so we are more focused on the relationship piece. There's lots of restorative justice agencies that are looking at more anytime there's harm or crime going on. So there's all kinds of different agencies, but people are more litigious. And so think of suing each other more than taking that first relational step. And if you're going to continue to be connected with somebody, trying to see if you can work it out before it gets super nasty in court, I think is another way that we can model living in peaceful communities.
Yeah, and I really got that from your quadrants example. We in the church tend to put everything into that um, we don't talk about it quadrant.
Mhm.
and that we it's a safe place to sweep the stuff under the rug. We all can pretend that we're community together, but all of this stuff is building up underneath the rug. So in regard to that quadrant, and I do realize that we have the list of goals on the one side, and maybe we could even insert the word mission in the church and the congregation on that goals side, that there are some times where we have to meet certain requirements that are part of being a part of our community. But in most cases, it is finding that orange zest and orange juice out of the same thing. Um, so
Mhm.
so so when we're talking about politics, or when that comes up, in most cases, we don't talk about politics in the church. Um, how do we get out of that quadrant of let's not talk about it?
Yeah, I think just this equipping yourself with some ways to communicate. Find the commonalities. Maybe don't talk about politics, talk about gardening or talk about awesome hikes in your area or something, and then you'll be able to have that. So one of the other pieces that we really encourage, whether it's in schools or communities, is build those relationships first. And then when the conflict comes around, you're going to be able to, oh, I know, Chuck over there who has, I shared my tomatoes with, but keeps mowing over my roses or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to know him in a different way, not just as the guy who keeps mowing over my roses. And so
Right.
if you know each other before the conflict happens, I think that's a way to feel more comfortable, and then also knowing how to approach them and not like pointing fingers or, being more like attacking. If you have the confidence to approach people in more civil ways, then I think it's easier to do.
Yeah. And our law expert Ted Tinsman writes this would be a good CLE for attorneys. What's a
And
CLE, by the way?
continuing legal education.
Ah, there you go.
We
So,
Dude,
do provide these.
couldn't get to my mic soon enough. Thanks.
all right. So let's go back over the specific talk idea. So say we have a good friend in our congregation who is on the total opposite side of my political understanding. How specifically could I use that talk idea with someone who is so opposed to who I am?
Yeah. Well, making sure that you are calmed down before you approach them and realize what's triggering you, figure out what's really happening for you. So that self-awareness is really important. But then approaching them in a way where you are curious, but also wanting to share your perspective and asking them and preparing them. And maybe, like, not everybody wants to talk right away when you are approaching them. So maybe you say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this conflict. When would be a good time? And so you might not talk to them right away, but when they've had a chance to think about it a little bit. I don't like being put on the spot. I'd prefer having a little bit of time to be able to think about what the topic is so that I'm ready to talk more about it. And so giving people that space to say when they're ready, and then being able to, being willing to give them that space to speak, but also bring in your own perspective is really important. And I think not being the only one that is the person that talks, and making room for others is, valuing the worth of everyone involved.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that goes to the last question we hear from Ron Baldwin.
Mhm.
How do we talk about this in the congregation? Rare is the congregation where a real safe place to talk appears. Yeah, and why would we want to talk about something that causes conflict? Approaching something this volatile almost makes you think, well, there's going to be a soapbox on this side of the room and the soapbox on the other side of the room. So how do we create those safe spaces?
Well, and I don't know if you all were, your congregations participated in this, but several years ago, Sandy and Diane had listening circles, where it was really just about hearing what was going on from each person's perspective without the idea that you're going to come to a conclusion. And so I actually have really, it didn't change my mind about a certain topic, but being able to actually understand how that person came to their conclusion was like, oh, that makes so much sense. I get it, why they're saying this. It's not how I feel, but it humanized them. And so I would say being able to talk before there's conflict or about topics that aren't in conflict would be the first start to create that safe space. I think power sometimes is an issue in congregations. Who's the one that makes decisions or not? How do you include as many more people in the decision making where they feel like their voice is heard? I think Kelly Phipps and Sandy have created now I don't remember the name of it, but it's the consensus that we do at conference.
Yes.
I think that's a really neat way to be able to gauge, all right, how opposed are you? And are you going to stand in the way? So those kind of ways of giving people that chance to just understand and be heard. Like so many times that's an important piece. And if somebody actually feels like you understand where they're coming from, they're going to be less likely to oppose you or to be in some kind of conflict with you.
Awesome. Really good information. I know we just ran over it very quickly, but quite a deep subject. And I know that many of us have gone through these kind of processes, especially when we had the national conference and other things in the life of the church that that forced us to hear different perspectives and understand a little bit more from each other. And that's where we wanted to start out tonight. You were name dropping on a lot of names there, Debbie. We will have Kelly Phipps with us later in November, talking about deciding together as a church, and that'll be another kind of after the event discussion that we'll have here on CIMM sessions. But I, again, really appreciate you being with us here tonight, and everyone who has foregone the Royals game, which is now 2-0 in favor. Oh, 2-2. Now we're going to end this real quick so we all can get to the game. Coming up next week, same time, same channel, we are going to have Matt Frizzell with us, and he's going to be talking about faith and politics, which forms which. I think that's going to be a really important discussion to have. And then on October 23rd, or part 3 of the series, is going to be Living Peacefully in a Divided Political World with Sandy Gamay. So we're really pleased to have Debbie with us, taking her time out tonight, missing the game, and sharing with us. And we thank you all for coming out this evening, and we hope to see you next week. Have a good evening.